Imagine being 12 years old and making $530,000 per month. This would not only make young Sarah Rector the richest African American child in America and the richest child in the world, it would also make her the first black female millionaire in American history. Sarah Rector owned land that held oil reserves that made her an oil tycoon and millionaire at only 12 years old. Sarah Rector was born in 1902 to Rose and Joseph Rector. They were descendants of Creek Indians who were forced to move out west after the Indian Removal Act. During the Indian Removal Act, Indian families were forced off their lands as it was confiscated by the United States government. They were then forced to migrate to Oklahoma. That migration would become known as the Trail of Tears. In the late 1800s, the government decided that it was time to give reparations to the Native American Indians for the theft of their lands, and they would do this by granting the Indians land allotments. Through an act of Congress, the Dawes Roll Commission was appointed and granted authority to decide who was Native American Indian and who was not. Therefore, they could decide who would receive land allotments and who would not. Because of this, the majority of Native American Indians never received reparations because they were being reclassified as colored, while simultaneously millions of European immigrants were being documented as Native American Indian, and they were receiving the benefits and land allotments that was due to the actual Native American Indians. The government awarded 90 million acres of land to the Creek Indians as reparations. Out of that 90 million acres of land, only 1 million acres actually went to the Creek Indians, while the other 89 million acres were granted to European immigrants who were falsely being documented as Indian. Those Europeans would later be known as the $5 Indians because they would pay a fee of $5 to members of the Dawes Roll Commission to be added to the list as an Indian that was eligible for land allotment assignments. Luckily for the Rector family, they were one of the few Indian families that did not lose their identities, and they were awarded 160 acres for being Creek Indian. After examining the land allotment that was awarded to their family, they noticed that the lands were so poor that it would be nearly impossible to produce and make any profits from the lands. Therefore, they would not be able to afford the taxes on the lands. And this was not a coincidence. The government had devised a plan to award the poorest lands to these Indian families and raise the taxes. Therefore, they wouldn't be able to afford to pay the taxes, and the lands could then be repossessed. Sarah's father tried everything to make the land profitable. He even tried to sell the land to make a profit, but he wasn't able to because the land was in Sarah's name, and since she was not legally of age to sign the deed away to a new owner, they had no choice but to hold onto the land and pay the taxes, or else the land would be repossessed. Sarah's father's prayers were answered one day when he was approached by a representative of the Standard Oil Company. They asked if they could examine the land for oil, and the Rectors, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, of course agreed to allow them to test the land's soil for oil. The oil company found oil reserves on the land and immediately started producing 2,500 barrels of oil per day. In a time period where the average family monthly income was only $700 a month, these oil reserves pushed Sarah's income to $18,000 per month. In today's currency, that's around $530,000 per month. The word spread quickly about the Rector's family's newfound wealth. It was printed in every major news publication across the states. This quickly made Sarah Rector famous and recognized as a phenom. She would soon become known all over the world as the richest little girl in the world. She even began getting marriage proposals from men all over the world who were 3 times her age, eager to get their hands on her wealth. There were actually hundreds of other black children who received land allotments and found oil on their lands as well. But their stories were unable to stand the test of time as Sarah's did. This newfound wealth made it very dangerous for these children. It actually made them targets. One child was even murdered by his own family member in a deceitful attempt to inherit the child's wealth. Even Sarah Rector herself was the target of an unsuccessful kidnapping. Sarah's family mostly lived modestly on their new lands. Her mother took care of the home and homeschooled Sarah, while her father was a great builder. He was unbelievably good with his hands and actually built them a brand new home on the lands. In an attempt to stop African Americans from building wealth at this time in America, the government passed a law that required these young black children with this newfound wealth to actually be appointed a guardian to manage the wealth for them. The law stated that their parents were not allowed to manage their wealth for them. It must be managed by a guardian appointed to them by the state. The guardian was even required to live on the property with them and manage the money. The guardian had a house built for his family on Sarah's land that was much more luxurious than the home of the Rector family. To no surprise, the guardians became notorious for mismanaging and stealing the wealth from these children. And of course, things were no different in the case of Sarah Rector. It was found that the state-appointed guardian had mismanaged Sarah's wealth the entire time and even stole large sums of money to invest in his own land deals. And of course, none of Sarah's money was ever recovered. The Rector family was in and out of court for 8 years, trying to gain control over Sarah's estate, which they didn't gain control of until Sarah was 18 years of age. Sarah's case caught the attention of prominent organizations such as the NAACP and prominent African American figures such as Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois began corresponding with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the United States Children's Bureau regarding the mismanagement of Sarah's estate. This also prompted him to establish a children's department within the NAACP to investigate claims of white guardians who were suspected of depriving black children of their land and wealth. Sarah later married a local businessman and had 3 children before being divorced in 1930. In 1934, she remarried William Crawford, a restaurant owner. Sarah purchased a home in Kansas City known as the Rector House. Today, that house is owned by a nonprofit organization with the hopes of historical and cultural restoration and preservation. Up until Sarah's death in 1967, she had developed a reputation for living an extravagant life of luxury, wearing the finest clothes, owning the finest cars and homes, and dining at the finest restaurants. She was also known for throwing extravagant parties that were attended by some of the most prominent African American figures of the time, including celebrities. Sarah had become so wealthy that the government allowed her to change her identity to white on her personal documents so that she may enjoy the privileges of the Europeans in America. But by the time of Sarah Rector's death, she was no longer classified as Creek Indian or white. She was once again reclassified as colored. It is unclear what happened to the estate of the Rector family, but what is clear is that the oil-rich lands that once ushered in a golden age for the Rector family are no longer under their ownership.